600 millions of us in the dark? Unacceptable. A future dictated by others? Not in our name. We're flipping the switch. We're rewriting our own energy destiny. From scarcity to abundance. From dependency to self-reliance. WhatsApp Africa is here, igniting a movement for 100% clean, homegrown energy. by Africans for Africans. Sun blazing from the Sahara to the Kalahari, powering homes, businesses, and futures. Winds sweeping across the Rift Valley, turning potential into prosperity. Rivers holding untapped power, electrifying cities and villages. This is our energy, our resources, our revolution. No false solutions, no one left behind, just real renewable power. Shared, sustained, and unstoppable. The future isn't just bright, it's African. The question isn't if we'll shine, it's how bright, how far, and who's coming with us. Let's WhatsApp Africa, powering change, energizing a continent.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Mila, may you please spotlight, open it. Okay, here we go. As stated, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone from wherever it is that you are joining us from. Before I start, please kindly note that there is French translation available if that is your preferred form of communication. But thank you so much for joining us today for what promises to be an exciting, but also very hopeful beginning in rewriting Africa's energy destiny. My name is Karabo Mokonyana, a proud convener of the WhatsApp Africa campaign, but also renewable energy campaigner at PowerShift Africa. And I'd like to warmly welcome you to this webinar to officially launch the WhatsApp Africa campaign. And just a bit about this campaign, because we've been working on it for months and months. So it's like finally it has really come to fruition. So the WhatsApp Africa campaign is basically a continent-wide campaign that pushes for renewable energy, not just as a climate fix, but also as a pathway to energy access, sustainable development, and green industrialization across the African continent. We want this campaign to truly reflect where it is that Africa is really going, specifically when it comes to the impacts of climate change, particularly when it comes to also our development as a continent. When it comes to the specific campaign, and I'm just gonna quickly share my screen. Okay. Okay, just do them. WhatsApp Africa doesn't stand on its own. It is powered by every community in Africa, strengthened by every partner, and made a reality by every government who believe in Africa's brighter, bolder energy future. The campaign doesn't exist in a vacuum. It stands on the shoulders of the powerful campaigns that paved the way. It also doesn't reinvent the wheel. It complements and works closely with campaigns like Repower Africa by 350africa.org, Banking on Renewables by Recourse, Reboot the World by REN21, Pyramid by Medsen, and 100% Renewable Energy by Can Africa. To wrap up, bring my screen. So to wrap up, I had to personally interrogate what this campaign means to me, specifically as a young African woman. And the first thing that came to mind was something that I stayed with, that stayed with me while growing up. And that is, and we say it in our language, people, young Africa, ito ufundisha lifasi, which means the wind that blows from Africa will heal the world. And that's exactly what this campaign means for me. It's about recognizing that our continent is not just a site of struggle, but a source of solutions. That the energy we harness, the people we empower, and the futures we imagine here in Africa have the power to transform not just our own communities, but the rest of the world. With that said, I'd like to warmly welcome you. Thank you so much. And I will now hand it over to Samira Ali, who is an energy coordinator at PowerShift Africa, who will facilitate the next segment. Over to you, Samira.
Thank you so much, Karabo. I'm proud of you for this campaign. I'll be moderating the session. I'd like to invite our keynote speaker, Mr. Felix Bob. He's a senior policy officer at the Africa Energy Commission at the AU. Welcome, Felix.
Thank you, Samira. Thank you, Karabo, and thank you all the team for putting this together. Distinguished guests, all protocols observed, ladies and gentlemen. As established by Karabo, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be joining for this very important webinar. My name is Felix Bobo Chite. I'm a senior policy officer at the African Energy Commission of the African Union, and I take this opportunity to greet each one of you in your respective capacities. I would like to first of all begin by conveying the utmost apology from the Executive Director of the African Energy Commission, who would have really loved to personally deliver this keynote address, but was unable to do so due to unavoidable circumstance. Secondly, I would like to thank PowerShift Africa for inviting the African Energy Commission to make this very keynote address in this important webinar on renewable energy and just transition under the campaign initiative WhatsApp Africa. We are particularly delighted that this webinar marks the launch and the beginning of a broader campaign to amplify Africa's voice on a just energy transition that meets the aspiration of the continent. In particular, the African Union Agenda 2063 and the African Common Position on Energy Access and Just Transitions continues to lead the call for African ownership of the continent's energy transition agenda, which is cognizant of the peculiar challenges that the African Union member states meet in bridging the energy demand gap on the continent. AFREC is therefore very happy with PowerShift Africa as one of the institutions that is making this African vision a reality. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa's energy landscape remains a very complex one and presents a combination of both challenges and opportunities. Key among the challenges is the limited access to energy, where approximately 600 million people, like we saw in the initial video clip here, still lack access to electricity, and over 1 billion, almost 1 billion still lacking access to clean cooking services. This accounts for over 80% of the global population without electricity and over 40% without access to clean cooking services. Whereas there has been notable progress made to lower these numbers down, the population growth rate on the continent tend to overshadow any meaningful progress, requiring accelerated interventions to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal number 7. The lower levels of energy access when compared to developed economies partly explain why the continent only accounts for less than 5% of the emission, despite being home to more than 15% of the global population. This is, however, still very high, and there is very high dependency on fossil fuel, which accounts for 52% of the total primary energy supply and 38% of the final energy consumption. Furthermore, what we see in Africa is that there's disproportionate devastation of an impact of extreme weather events that is caused by climate change. And these events results in very huge loss of lives, livelihoods, and economic instability within the affected communities. This is a current reality that we see on the continent in spite of the immense renewable energy potential on the continent and its usage as home to about 30% of the world's mineral reserves, critical for the transition to cleaner energy sources. And this is the reason why ramping up investments in renewable energy, together with the uptake of other cleaner energy sources, such as natural gas, is very paramount if we are to tackle the growing energy demand on the continent. Urgent action is therefore needed by all stakeholders and is required to ensure that energy poverty and development challenges are addressed simultaneously in order to maximize the benefits of development as well as mitigate the risk posed by the rapid changing climate. This requires that all global efforts must be mobilized to pursue the low carbon development pathways, particularly in the renewable energy subsector. Ladies and gentlemen, just like in any other developing region in the global south, the energy transition paradigm presents a crucial moment for Africa to revolutionize the continent's energy supply system and accelerate our development goals. However, this requires that the transition must align with Africa's urgent call for a differentiated approach, as emphasized in the African Common Position on Energy Access and Just Transition. It is important that we appreciate what the Common Position actually entails, and that is to have an equitable development of our energy resources on the continent that bridges and utilizes all the available energy sources that are on the continent. It is in this view that the African Energy Commission has developed the African Energy Transition Strategy and Action Plan for the continent, which will be validated by member states later this month. The strategy at its center identifies main pillars and actions that must be implemented in a phased manner towards a low carbon future by the year 2063. Other African Union initiatives supporting a sustainable energy future includes the following. One, the African Energy Efficiency Strategy and Action Plan that seeks to improve Africa's energy productivity by 70% by 2063 through energy efficiency intervention across all sectors of the economy, among them transport, housing, and industries. Two, the African Green Hydrogen Strategy that seeks to position Africa as a green hydrogen hub supported by immense clean resources and critical minerals. Three, the Continental Power System Master Plan, which aims to develop smart transmission and distribution infrastructure to connect countries and regions across the continent, creating a single electricity market. Four, the African Green Mineral Strategy that presents a unique opportunity for Africa to take control of resources, move up the value chain, and drive industrialization for prosperity. These initiatives provide opportunities to stakeholders and seek to address the persistent barriers to energy development on the continent that include, among others, technical, financial, markets, policy, and regulatory barriers. This is why the mobilization of adequate financing to accelerate the energy transition agenda in Africa and supporting individual AU member states to develop their national deep decarbonization pathways is the focus, and the initiatives like WhatsApp Africa that we are launching today by PowerShift Africa would not have come at the right time. Africa requires investments of approximately $120 billion per year to achieve universal electricity access by 2040. Yet, the current investment that we see only amounts to about $30 billion per year, with much of the financing focused on operations and maintenance. The African Energy Commission, therefore, in partnership with African Development Bank, is supporting 3 out of the 18 member states that have expressed interest in developing their decarbonization pathways, but more resources are required to support the remaining member states and provide the capacity needed for sustainability to prevail. More importantly, there is a need to invest in the initiatives identified as part of the sustainable energy pathways, and we therefore invite all stakeholders to implement concrete actions on capacity building, development of decarbonization pathways, and promoting climate-friendly investment in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, I would like to reaffirm African Union's commitment to a just energy transition in Africa and to encourage that this campaign, which we are launching today, be launched to strengthen our partnership for greater impact. Together, we can mobilize the required resources and investments necessary to transform Africa's unparalleled abundance of energy sources and critical green minerals into equitable, sustainable growth while contributing to the attainment of the global aspiration for a low carbon future. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish all of us fruitful deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felix, for that address. For sure, accelerated interventions on this low-level energy access in Africa are needed. And this now leads us to our panel discussion on powering the future and owning the transition. I would like to introduce our first panelist, Mr. Mohamed Ado, the Director for PowerShift Africa. Welcome, Mohamed.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start the panel discussion. Your first question would be, given your extensive experience in founding and leading PowerShift Africa, what do you consider to be the most critical policy challenges needed in Africa to support a just and equitable energy transition? And how can these changes be effectively implemented in the context of existing political and economic systems? Just a reminder to all our panelists, you will have 5 questions for each question, and I will be having a timer. Apologies in advance if I stop you midway. Thank you.
Thanks, Amira. Our continent, colleagues, is facing 2 interrelated challenges. First, it has many people without energy access, as you've been reminded by Felix, but also by the introductory video. Often, these people who lack energy access are in remote places, beyond the reach of conventional, grids. And secondly, many of our people are suffering from the impact of climate change. So the direction our continent chooses to develop is likely to be a decisive moment in the battle against the climate crisis. We're a continent that has, I think, over 1.4 billion people. And this is set to double over the next 30 years. Our continent is on the cusp of sweeping economic development with major consequences depending on how this development is going to be powered. Will we opt for a future built on clean energy or a path that is tied to fossil fuels? So the challenge we face is that Africans desperately need access to energy to power development. But what is infuriating is that millions of Africans struggle for energy access on a continent with enough wind and solar potential to become a clean energy superpower. So this lack of energy access, underpins many of our problems, from poverty to substandard infrastructure to our low economic development. These are some of the challenges that are actually holding us back. And so the solution to both of these major issues is Africa's vast renewable energy potential. Our continent is blessed with an abundance of clean wind and solar power and geothermal, which can both power our development, reduce emissions, and tackle the cause of the climate crisis. Decentralized wind and solar can also be built quickly, cheaply, flexibly, and without the need for vast oil and gas pipelines or other fossil fuel infrastructures. Fossil fuel companies are only too eager to shackle our continent with oil and gas pipelines and coal plants. Without a clear alternative, this path could set, the global climate agenda back permanently. So what we need is, we need to see African leaders making, clean energy investment a national and continental priority. We need to be pursuing, the expansion of, decentralized renewable energy solutions, and understand that pursuing fossil fuel expansion will only heap misery of extreme weather onto the heads of vulnerable Africans while shackling us, with old, outdated energy infrastructure of the past. I think we have an opportunity to leapfrog and become green leaders. We missed out on the fossil fuel powered industrialization. We have an opportunity to now chart a path which is going to be powered by the energy of the 21st century. So we need to see them, our leaders that is, including us, investing in clean energy, boosting research and development into renewables, and pooling resources across the continent rather than looking at it as a national issue so that we can share knowledge and be able to boost overall capacity across the continent. So if this continent, which has suffered the most, yet contributed the least to the climate crisis, can be the first to fully embrace What's Up Africa and embrace 100% renewables, that will leave the major polluters nowhere to hide. So the combination of shaming the laggards and offering an example to follow will give global climate action the shake-up it needs. And I hope that is what What's Up Africa is going to provide us.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. We'll go to the second question, which is, given Africa's history with resource extraction and the challenges of neocolonialism, how can we ensure that the continent's transition to renewable energy avoids repeating the same exploitative dynamics that have historically accompanied resource extraction? And what steps can be taken to ensure that African nations retain control over their natural resources and benefit equitably from the green energy transition?
I think what we need to first acknowledge is that rich nations from the global north owe a climate debt to Africa. The historic emissions have caused the current crisis and also contributed to Africans' poverty. So what we need to do is demand first that they repay their climate debt by investing in Africa's clean energy. I think in recent years, we've seen bilateral arrangements between nations from the global north doing exactly this, but not at the scale that is needed. So more of this should be encouraged, as well as multilateral funds, which are vital to laying the groundwork for climate solutions built on the principles of climate justice. I think what we need to be clear is we can't trudge in the footsteps of the historic polluters unless we leapfrog and chart an alternative path which effectively avoids some of the historic missteps that have caused the climate crisis, but also the exploitive dynamics that have made this continent the poorest, partly because of the resource extraction, which continues to favor the historic polluters who continue to benefit out of the resources of Africa and live in Africa much poorer. I think African nations need to work with each other. I think we need to help rebuild the Pan-African solidarity our forefathers helped to create. I think unless we can help build unity across Africa and ensure our resources, whether it's wind, solar, geothermal, or the transition minerals that are vital for solar and battery technology, so that they're not plundered like we've seen in the past. And we ensure that these resources are used to benefit Africans first. I think the value of these resources need to be recognized firstly by Africans. These need to be valued properly by African governments and protected, not sold cheaply in their raw form as we do now. We've become a continent that exports, a lot of its resources in their raw form, and then we have to import the finished product and mostly using foreign exchange that we hardly have access to. So this is something I think we need to stop. I think there's an opportunity for us to build, pressure on our governments and other stakeholders so that we can hold them accountable, but also increase public awareness of these valuable resources that God has endowed on us, as well as our abundant clean energy. The other great natural resources we have are the African people. That is why we will need to bring together the leading voices from across Africa, experts in the field of science, economics, politics, and campaigning, to help us catalyze an African climate movement which can provide the democratic support for climate action. There was an Afrobarometer report that was published today, which said that 17% of Africans, only 17% of Africans actually hold the historic polluters accountable for the climate crisis we face. So we're vulnerable, least responsible, but sadly also the least informed. So Africa needs to move from being the victim of climate change to being part of the solutions. We need to see Africans holding their governments to account and then putting pressure on the northern governments so that we can be able to reject the overtures of the fossil fuel industry and to make decisions for the common good, which will usher in the age of 100% renewable energy across Africa, which will power Africa, but we can also be able to share the surplus with the rest of the world. I think there's an opportunity for this continent to help lead in the green revolution. The most vulnerable, the least responsible, that has majority of this population still without energy access, can help address some of these injustices, but also help them lead the world in the direction that will help us actually contain the climate crisis.
So much, Mohammed. There you heard it, guys. We are the least responsible, most vulnerable, and as Africa, we need to work together. Stop being the victim and, start being part of the solution. I will head over to our next panelist, Shamika. Shamika is a renewable energy project manager, developer with a relentless commitment to advancing sustainable and renewable solutions. She's also a project developer at HDF Energy. Thank you so much, Shamika, for being part of our panelists today. I will head on and ask the first question. Given your expertise in renewable energy project management at HDF Energy, and with debates around renewable energy storage challenges, what innovative solutions have you seen or implemented for efficient renewable energy storage in small communities, particularly to ensure reliability and affordability?
Sure. Thank you so much, Samira, for that excellent question and also for the hosts of this webinar. I'm already learning so much. So I think, especially when you talk about storage and you talk about small communities, it's not necessarily the core focus when you think about developers. However, more and more so in the African continent at large, we are made up of these small communities, and they should be the core focus when it comes to sustainable solutions, because we really do need to start from the ground up. And so in the recent times, especially in the Southern Africa area of our region, we're starting to notice that there are a bit more innovative solutions around microgrids and mini grids for certain communities. However, along with red tape and a lot of regulatory approvals, we aren't really seeing much focus when it comes to pushing new, efficient, and more affordable technologies directly to these communities. But just from what I've been exposed to, and currently with what we are developing, renew stable power plants are and can be used as micro and mini grids and directly to communities that are completely off grid or in form of an island. And this is essentially combining intermittent technology and sources such as solar PV and wind. And we couple this with a source of BESS, which is for a small portion. This would be for the short-term storage solution. And then we also have our hydrogen electrolyzer as well as the fuel cell coupled in. So it is an integrated technology offering that takes the intermittency of renewables and couples this with reliable and long and short-term storage. What this does is also creates a balancing effect. So if it is connected to a grid, it is able to provide ancillary services, which is what we are missing out on. Besides the infrastructure issue that we all face in Africa, we more are facing balancing of our grid as well. So that's one thing that we are able to combat and to provide assistance on. But going back to the communities, there's also some kind of exploration when it comes to second life BESS systems that can be implemented in these communities. And what this does is it takes lithium-ion battery energy storage, and it can be used if it's between 70 to 80% of retention, in terms of capacity. And these are being repurposed in certain communities as pilot projects for now. And it is at a drastically cut cost. And it provides the same amount of reliability because when you do talk about communities, essentially it is around appliance and that kind of load base. So it is working well, according to some of the pilot projects that have been implemented. And another one is the DC mini grids or the modular storage. that we are seeing that's being implemented, but not at the large scale that it needs to currently. It is sufficient for the load that it is able to hold at this point. It is more for the rural communities or communities that are of very low LSM currently. And then taking it up a notch, some other more established communities that are able to afford it are now looking at smart grid technology that can take them off grid. So we are seeing certain BESS systems that operate with technology and are able to be automated as well. So they're able to step down and step up according to what the requirements are. However, this is very expensive, so it hasn't been widely implemented as yet. So I think if we go back and look at the bigger picture, it really does boil down to what the requirement would be and then what technology can be implemented. And then also, the sustainability of that project for when we'd have to replace or for how long it would be able to be used for, and then the financing of that.
Thank you so much, Shamika, for that answer. And I'm glad that, your technology is focusing on small communities and, trying to get them access to power off grid. Let's move on to the second question for you, which is, given your passion to encourage women and the youth into job opportunities within the renewable energy industry and engineering, what strategies are being implemented to ensure greater inclusion and opportunities for women and youth in the industry?
Sure, absolutely. So yes, I'm actually involved in a few other initiatives within Southern Africa currently, and we really do focus from the early childhood development. So we do have a few initiatives via WomEng, which is a women engineering NPO, and we center around outreach to schools. And within this, we are promoting a 1 million girl in STEM initiative by 2030. So we are driving the force behind the gender neutrality and to really push through females into getting into STEM industries, careers, jobs, so the full value chain essentially. And then also, within certain regulation and policies and certain amendments that are happening in the workplace, we are starting to see a bit more emphasis on gender mainstreaming policies that are coming up. So there are incentives for certain companies to now employ female or to have a certain percentage of females even at board level. So there are women that are now actively taking space to, make decisions and to drive teams, especially technical teams, and be leaders that are actually really contributing to the success of these companies. So I do know it's not happening at the pace in which we do need it to happen, but it is happening, and I think that's a positive outlook. There are a few other initiatives. So within Southern Africa, there's a company, GIZ, and they run a few initiatives and they partner with the education institutes, so universities and TVET colleges, so the trade and industry colleges as well. And they are able to really upskill, reskill, and create new curriculums that are centered around the just energy transition. And this is to encourage the youth to get into, careers that are really going to be sustainable for our future as Africa approaches the transition in all its different phases. So it's quite exciting. And I think also part of just energy transition, for each country, there's a portion of the social and the economic development implementation plans. And within these implementation plans, it is clearly outlined what the focus should be, and especially the percentages that should be allocated to women in certain initiatives that is driving forward the change that we need. And I think also in general, the councils that we have, Women in Energy, the GWEC, and a few others to mention, there's really great outcomes from these. It's no longer just women sitting together and engaging on challenges and issues. We are now able to come back with feedback of all the initiatives that we've begun, and to have some new insights from what we are able to work toward, what we have been working towards, as well as celebrating some awards that women are winning with the work that they're being recognized with in the industry. So I think all in all, there's so many different initiatives that are happening. It's just about educating everyone and getting them involved in active collaboration with intention. Thank you, Samira.
Thank you so much for that answer. They say us women, we understand all problems, and even though it's not moving at the pace that it's needed, I'm very happy that, women are involved in all your projects and decision-making processes. We will move on to our next panelist, Rana Adib. Rana Adib is the Executive Secretary of REN21, the Renewable Energy Policy Network for the 21st Century. Thank you so much, Rana, for being part of our webinar. We really appreciate it. I will move on to your questions, if you don't mind. We can start right now. So Rana, yes. So Rana, given the importance of renewables for our country's development and seeing the global south pushing their governance to adopt renewable energy, how do you prepare for this shifting geopolitical landscape?
Yeah, thank you very much, Samira, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be part of basically this discussion, and congratulations also to WhatsApp Africa, because I think it's very clear we need to reposition, I think, the renewable energy narrative in Africa, on the African continent, but also globally. And I think WhatsApp Africa is really contributing to this. So I think it's very clear that when we are, and let's be honest, the last month have very clearly shown like the geopolitical changes which are happening. And I think change is something that is a real opportunity. And but the question also is like on the preparation. So I think very clearly the first preparation, and I'm echoing basically many of the contributions we had before, is like access to information, spreading knowledge, insights, etc. amongst decision makers, because the reality also is that there is a lot of misinformation, misconceptions still out there concerning renewable energy and how renewables can really contribute not only to addressing energy access, but for economic development, industrialization, and development in the broader sense. I think this is one part. There is also still misinformation out there on the role of decentralized renewable energy, and I think this is really exciting to see. I mean, today we know that it's not technological barriers, but it is very clearly something that needs to be taken into account in the strategic developments, basically, or in the strategy developments. There is this part, but there is another part, and I think this is really important when we're looking at the broader geopolitical part, to first understand and really acknowledge and create the spaces where we can have these discussions at the continental level, but also at the global and regional level, that a renewable-based economy and geopolitics look very different than the ones building on hydrocarbon. That the future of fossil fuel producing and exporting countries compared to importing countries and dependent countries will look very different. And that as a result, we also need to have basically new approaches and spaces where we can shape international relations. And I think this is where, and I bring this down again to the African continent, where I think it is really important to show at the African continent the opportunity that do exist, you see, and they are different when we're looking at countries that have critical minerals. Obviously, the role they play in the geopolitics is different, and they need specific pathways, but also acknowledging for the fact that not all African countries do have critical minerals, all of them have renewable energy, but then also understanding that not all of them will probably produce the renewable energy technologies, but the renewable energy is going to help drive different economic and industrial activities. And I think this is basically a part where today, when I'm looking at the opportunities and the new geopolitics, I think it is really important to make the shift to not only have energy discussions here and look at the energy supply chains, but also really looking at how does actually the economy look like we're building when we have renewable energy. Just one number, because I think it's very often, we have not spoken yet about the fact that one of the challenges Africa also faces is basically challenges and opportunities is job creation for the young population. And I think here I find this a quite intriguing number, because we tend to speak very much about the jobs linked to renewable energy. But when you're looking at the energy jobs globally, they are only making up 1.9% of the global workforce, 1.9%. And this is fossil fuel and renewable jobs included. What does this indicate? It actually indicates that energy has a very different role to play. And we should not only look at it as a certain source and technological solution, but energy is the key driver of economic development and industrialization, which also means that on the African continent, when you're looking at the future of renewables, it is also important to basically develop regional strategies on what industrial hubs are we creating, what regional trade opportunities are we creating, because the reality is that geopolitics are not only going to change on the energy side, but they are also going to change in terms of where are the main populations, where are the big markets, and where do we also need to build economic and industrial hubs. So from Rent on one side, we clearly see that the question today is, how do we build a renewable-based economy? And to prepare for this, I think it's indeed addressing misinformation on the energy front, but also strategically anchoring the energy discussion in the economic, trade, industrialization strategies, and really broadening the discussion to beyond the energy and the climate bubble, I would say.
Thank you so much, Rana. Actually, your 5 minutes just expired right now. I've noted one important point that you had mentioned, which is information. And as our previous panelist, Mr. Mohammed, had mentioned, we only have 17% of informed Africans when it comes to this shift. So it's really something that we need to work on. Moving on to our second question to you, Rana. Given your extensive work at REN 21 with policy and decision making, your interest in community mobilization and convening, facilitating dialogues between different stakeholders, how can communities be empowered to lead renewable energy and just transition movements? And how can stakeholders play a role in that?
I would probably build again on the question of information, because that's the first part. And I think the beauty of renewable energy, and that's something that is very encouraging, is the fact that renewable energy can be owned not only by the utilities and more government and state and decentralized way, but can also be owned by citizens, by communities, by companies. So that is already a first part that is really important. And I also think that when you're looking at some countries globally, but also on the African continent, and economic players facing load shedding, for instance, that has directly an economic impact, you see that they are already turning to renewable energy for economic reasons and energy security reasons. And I think this is basically creating a very interesting opportunity in terms of showcasing how renewable energy is an opportunity to bring energy security and opportunities for economic development, but also the opportunity to show that other ownership models and other governance of energy are possible. So I think there are really great realities that do exist to spread basically this possibility. Now, on the community side, and I think this is obviously, let's be really honest, when we're speaking about energy infrastructure, not everything will be grassroots and bottom up. There will still be some more top-down, decentralized infrastructure developments. We're speaking about large infrastructure here. A clear learning is, however, that when governments are engaging in infrastructure development, it is really important to basically include the multi-stakeholder. And here I'm really insisting on this goes from citizens to communities, to industry, to civil society organization, to science and academia, and involve them already in the planning of the infrastructure. Why? Because we actually see that some players are here quite might be more ambitious on what is possible, might be more aware on what is possible, and can help to raise the ambition. They can also help to hold basically governments accountable for the fact that energy is there to basically serve the local population and basically meet local needs, but also create local or for local value creation, so local supply chains, local economic activities. Then the other part, I had to really do this. The reality is you also need the policy framework for this. So it is very clear that one part is information. The second part is involvement in planning. The third part is making sure that communities have the right, you see, that you have independent power producers, so that you have basically the right for citizens, communities, etc., to build their own infrastructure or energy infrastructure systems, consume this energy, but potentially also sell it. So this is one part. And the third part I would include here is ultimately it is about building up not only the governance, but also sustainable business cases. And here I think there is a part we can very much explore and should explore when we're building community energy. I think it is bringing the community together, or communities and citizens, cities together, with national governments, obviously, but local governments, but also private sector off-takers, so the energy consuming sectors, because they are very interested in basically secure energy supply. But this is also a way to have more economic stability, I guess, in terms of investment, in terms of paying the bills, but also in terms of mobilizing local currency investment in energy infrastructure. So I would say, what are the rules is information, empowerment, that the governance can be different, involvement of multi-stakeholder from the early planning part on, but also strategically bridging basically the energy producing sector with the energy consuming sector, in particular focusing on the economic and industrial partners to really have strategic allies and also build solid business models.
Thank you so much, Rana, for that. Thank you so much. As you said, what we need is information, involvement of the communities, and also giving communities the right to be able to own some of this infrastructure for economic empowerment. I will move on and introduce our final panelist, Boitumelo Molete. Boitumelo is in the Congress of the South African Trade Unions, Social Development Policy Coordinator, and a co-lead on climate change and just transition at the COSATU Policy Unit. She also sits at the National Economic Development and Labour Council. Thank you so much, Boitumelo, for honoring our invite and coming on board today. I will start our first question, which is, given your extensive role in labor policy and climate advocacy in the Presidential Climate Commission, how can labor movements effectively advocate for a just transition that protects workers' rights while accelerating the shift to renewable energy? What policies or frameworks do you see as critical to ensuring fair job transitions in the energy sector?
Sure, thank you very much for the invitation. Just as a background, the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, is basically a labor federation that works in the spaces of labor rights advocacy, climate justice, as well as the just transition. And ours is rooted in defending and committing to ensuring that workers are not left behind in this transition that's taking place. So we recognized in Congress, because we are a mandate and membership-based organization, the importance of actually addressing issues of climate change and the impacts it has on communities and workers. And I'm very glad the previous speaker speaks directly to issues of ownership within communities and workers. And it's something that we advocate for as the Congress of South African Trade Unions. Another part that I think I need to speak to is the fact that I do sit on the Presidential Climate Commission as a commissioner representing the interests of workers in the commission. So just also to indicate that the labor movement in its entirety across the continent, the globe, has been at the forefront of issues of just transition, of issues of climate change. And in fact, the wording of just transition was coined by workers. So what we are advocating for is to ensuring that climate action is not just pursued, but is ensuring that we are capturing the importance of workers and communities in partnership with business and government in ensuring for a just and equitable transition. So the type of policies that we advocate for are policies that ensure that there are sufficient recommendations to the presidency in terms of the level of skilling, upskilling, and reskilling. We take very importantly that workers need to be taken along into this transition. We also speak to issues of climate justice in the sense that workers' livelihoods are not affected when we do address issues of climate change. Another part is to ensure that when we advocate and bargain for a just and equitable transition, we embed this in ensuring that in our collective bargaining agreements, there are frameworks that protect workers' rights in the transition. So when we sit at the PCC, the policies that we are currently advocating for and we're speaking to is ensuring that we're currently calling for a code of good practice to handle the manner in which the transition takes place and how workers will then be participating in the transition as the transition takes place. We're also looking to ensure that there are job guarantees and that workers that are displaced are able to be given job opportunities that will have decent wages and that will ensure that they are not left destitute without employment and without a sustainable livelihood. So ours is to ensure that we advocate solely for the protection of workers in their rights, in ensuring that their health, their livelihoods are protected. COSATU is doing this also through our policy recommendations. We have a policy recommendation that was adopted in 2009 that is a policy on climate change titled The Just Transition to a Low Carbon and Climate Resilient Economy. We also have a Just Transition Blueprint in which we advocate for 3 specific sectors, not that they're the only sectors that will transition, but we speak about potential pathways for workers in transport, for workers in agriculture, as well as for workers in mining. So we're trying to start envisioning how the future of work would look in those sectors and what type of recommendations we should bring forward, including issues of social protection for workers. We've also developed toolkits for workers to use at the workplace level. These toolkits focus specifically on young workers, which would cover youth, focuses on gender, organizers, and educators. So what we're trying to do is prepare our membership base at the level of the workplace so that they're able to advocate for themselves and they're able to hold their employers accountable so that these policies that are being implemented to transition are actually not leaving them behind. So yeah, I think that would cover what we're doing in terms of policy and also what we advocate for on the Presidential Climate Commission, which is inclusivity, transparency, and worker involvement that is meaningful.
Thanks so much, Bertumelo, for that answer. There's really no transition while leaving the workers behind. They need to take them along this. Let's move on to the second question, which is considering the deep historical significance of mines and their roles in shaping neighboring communities, how can labor movements such as COSATU ensure that the just transition protects both the livelihoods of mine workers and the economic well-being of these communities as the industry shifts towards renewable energy?
I think mining is a very particular sector, especially with COSATU. One of our biggest affiliates is the National Union of Mine Workers, with a significant membership in the mining sector. And we do know that mining has shaped the economy and is the social, is the fiber of our nation and our nation building. So that is a sector that we've taken very much attention to. As I indicated in our blueprint, we've been able to speak to that. And as COSATU, we see the transition as an opportunity to basically rewrite the social contract in these communities. So we are advocating and participating in a lot of community initiatives, and we are ensuring that even with our considerations in terms of policy, we do incorporate the voices of the community, the voices of workers who are part of the community, and also make sure that we incorporate issues of youth and women, as well as the informal sector. So what we do is call significantly for an economic diversification, where the entire economy in these mining focused regions are able to be considered and planned for and modeled adequately so that the transition does not negatively affect them. We also believe in the principle of social ownership, where workers themselves are not just consumers, and I think the previous speaker spoke to this, where workers themselves are not just consumers in this transition in renewable energy, but they're able to themselves generate some form of income and some form of participation in these renewable energy plannings, a part that we have seen significantly as ideas coming from the organized labor constituency has been to have employee shared ownership schemes, where they would allow for workers to actually participate and be able to collaborate to be part of renewable energy generation. So we do believe in building communities and being part of communities to form solutions. We firmly believe in that. I mean, the African energy future must be worker-led, and that communities and workers are rooted in that. The social justice element of it is really where we are able to connect workers and communities and make sure that the transition is inclusive and equitable for all of the people in the community and within workplaces, creating decent jobs and ensuring that the economy is actually built through equity and fairness.
Thank you, Boitumelo. I just want to thank all our panelists during today's session. You guys gave some very insightful comments. You know, the solution to our problems is our vast renewable energy potential, and we need to work together and create Pan-African solidarity, as Mohammed had stated. Stop being victims and be part of the solution for Africa. We need to be informed, you know, information, involve our communities and, you know, give them the right to own and not let down our workers, take them along this transition process. Just a reminder to all to send your questions on the Q&A chat box, and they will be answered by the panelists. I would like to hand over this session to my colleague Karabo, who will be moderating the Q&A session with the panelists on the chat box. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Samira. I'll just throw the questions at you, if you don't mind, and then we'll allocate them accordingly to who would see fit to answer the questions. So there's a couple of questions, and thank you so much to everyone that's really participated in terms of sending questions. Let me start with these two. So this is from an anonymous attendee. And I'll start with the second one on considering policies like the US's drill baby drill approach and new tariffs. How might Africa's ability to secure financing be affected, especially as some countries prioritize investments in war and defense rather than climate action? So that's question number one. Question number two is, what practical steps can Africa take to attract renewable energy investments in the continent through leveraging regional blocs like SADC and global partnerships like BRICS? What does that look like? How can we attract investment through these blocs despite the geopolitical and regional politics among the states? And then I'll add a third one, and then we can go on to the speakers. And then this one is to Shamika specifically, so we don't have to allocate that one. Could you please share an example of economic benefits from one of the communities you work with on renewable and grids? Yes, let me stop there. Samira?
Hi, sorry everyone for that. Yes, so I was actually at a wind farm, so Jeffreys Bay Wind Farm in South Africa, and I worked there with the economic and development teams that were carrying out the implementation strategies at that time. And, within that, we covered 150-kilometer radius around our site, and we conducted various outreaches. So we were actually able to assist some individuals to start SMME, so startups or all the way to medium-based businesses. And this was via multiple channels, either helping them register their business and then also get recognized for development funding or different types of funding that was available, as well as grants to empower them to continue with their business endeavors. That was one example that we were actually able to, or we do have reports of multiple businesses now thriving via that. The other one was we created an internship program. And within this, there were communities that were engaged with, and schools were participating in the bursary challenge that we had. And up to date, there are about 20 kids within this community that were able to get an education all the way to tertiary via the bursaries that we had presented them with. And then we also assisted in terms of employment or with work experience via the internship thereafter. Thank you, Samira and Karabo.
Thank you for that answer, Shamika. To the other panelists, is there any of the questions that you guys would like to answer? The floor is open.
Happy to come in. Okay. Somebody wanted to come in before me, so I'll give that person the chance.
Go ahead, Mohammed. I'll follow you.
No, on the question of the US, I just wanted to say, we know the Trump's administration will only want to ban more, fossil fuels. And so the energy diplomacy is basically hinged on pushing the rest of the world to actually buy some of their fossil or create markets for their fossil industry. And so instead of us shackling ourselves with outdated, fossil fuel infrastructure, such as coal, I think as a continent that is blessed with, abundant, clean, renewable energy, I think we need to advocate and make a case why this continent that is energy poor can actually do exactly what we did with the telecommunications. We're able to leapfrog, landline telephone technology and adopt cell phones. So we're also in a good place now to be able to leapfrog that energy and become green leaders. And that is already happening in many African countries. So if you look at my own country, Kenya, Morocco, South Africa, I think we're already making significant strides in renewable energy investments and development that allows us to be able to harness solar, wind, geothermal, hydropower. And these are opportunities I think we need to actually seize. Then the next thing is, how are we going to actually realize the investment that this continent requires? So three things for me. One is we need to demand the rich historical polluters who've caused the climate emergency in the first place to pay their climate debt. So they need to provide climate finance, they need to provide technology, and they need to be able to support capacity building so that we can be able to help our countries be able to leapfrog and develop, the renewable energy infrastructure. I think that is the first thing about finance. The historic polluter through climate finance must help, pay the bill. The second part is the opportunity that we have with our own domestic resource mobilization. I don't think there's any denying that a lot of our countries are in any case going to develop our energy infrastructure. And so as we develop our energy infrastructure, I think we need to use the limited fiscal capacity that we have to support what we require. And so it goes without saying that if you're going to develop your energy, and renewables are currently cheap and can actually be installed quickly, so it makes business sense for us to do that. The third thing for me is the South-South collaboration. I think given the shift in the geopolitics, I think it's time we started promoting genuine partnership between global South countries. There's an opportunity here. And so if we recognize the goals of the transition and the opportunity for us to achieve at speed, I think we need to recognize that if we're going to leapfrog, there's no better person to learn what leapfrogging entails than the frog. And in this case, the frog is China. They've done it, they've mastered the art, they've mastered the technology, and we should be talking to them about technology transfer rather than just shipping our transition minerals cheaply. So there's an opportunity for us to actually engender a better South-South collaboration that is actually built on the good of the planet. And I think that is an opportunity for us to actually realize. We have, a geostrategic leverage over the rest of the world. It's just that we haven't capitalized on it. We're the darling of the West, they've colonized us, particularly Europe. We're the darling of the Chinese because they extract a lot of, critical resources out of Africa, and they see us as a market for their finished products. So how about leveraging that potential for the common good of the planet so that we deliver economic wins for ourselves and for them, but within the planetary limits. And that is an opportunity I think we can realize.
Thank you so much for that, Mohammed. Rana, you can take over.
Yes. Thank you. I would like to build probably on what Mohammed said. I think there is, because there is also the question, how can we basically leverage, regional platforms like SADC and also partnerships with BRICS. And I think this is actually something that is really, really important because, yes, it is about leveraging the opportunities, and the opportunities can be critical minerals. The opportunities are the renewable energy resources. The opportunities are for many countries that they are not space-constrained environment, which is quite different, for instance, in many European countries. The reality, however, also is that, unfortunately, the international, the world order to some extent, and the World Trade Organization does not always acknowledge for, the local value, local content, does not allow for it, makes it difficult to attract finance to the African continent. And with regard to this, I actually think that it's really important to build very much on the momentum around regional strategies. I think at the last COP, there has not been greatest outcome, but I think an opportunity that has been there is the regional corridors that are really looking into energy infrastructure. And I think that basically the regional, if you like, SADC, for instance, is a very important platform to not only look at the regional infrastructure, but also link it directly to regional resources that exist, how we also create regional industrial hubs, what it means in terms of, building up regional trade. And let's be honest, I think there is still a lot of work to do on countries also working together at the regional level, but also skilling strategies. I think this is, and here I would like to mention one part, because there is obviously, and I think it's completely justified, this part of capacity building also from the north to the south, but there is also capacity building from the south to south, and also really interesting innovative opportunities. So I take the example of Pakistan. Pakistan has installed 17 gigawatt or 18 gigawatt of solar PV in just 1 year. They have trained thousands of solar technicians on TikTok. So I also think these are basically, there are very interesting opportunities to really build on exchange of good practice, of opportunities from on the South-South level by looking into South-South platforms. I think this is one part. But I would also say that we need a new governance, global governance too, that is really acknowledging for this. And here I think it is important to really ask for transparency in the frameworks and clear KPIs, key performance indicators, on saying, what does a win-win situation mean when you look at it from global north to global south or global south? What does this mean for the continent? What does this mean for a region? What does it mean for a community, for a nation? What does it mean for a community? So that we can have also more transparent discussions and clarity about the new dependencies that are also there, and how to build on the new opportunities in a fair way.
Thank you so much, Rana. Boitumelo, did you have any answer?
Yes, certainly. I know we're out of time, but I saw the question on how can we best collaborate. I think it's important that we have solidarity, especially in the continent, and the idea of having South-South exchanges are very important. And what we've done is COSATU is actually initiate for workers in the Global South to meet and actually speak to ourselves as to how we'd want to address this issue. Because the Global North is very much organized in what they are actually putting forward on platforms in the UNFCCC, for instance. There's an upcoming subsidiary body meeting in Bonn this June. What is the Global South saying? Where are we going? What are the types of agendas that we're pushing in the SB? What agendas are we pushing at COP? And I think it's very important for these type of formations to start taking place so that we're able to collaborate meaningfully from various formations so that we bring across solid and concrete solutions to issues of Africa and how we relate in the UNFCCC, how we relate in the entire discourse of just transition and climate change. I also think we must be relentless on our call for a fair deal when it comes to what we're calling for as Africa. I think the issue of climate finance needs to be put on the table, and we need to articulate ourselves quite well. When we call for a climate finance that is developmental in nature, when we call for climate finance that will ensure that Africa, the Global South, is able to actually have is actually able to have valid just transition solutions to it. The issue of skills and development, education, youth, women in Africa is big, and we need to start pushing for it more relentlessly. And without any shame, actually, when we get to these platforms. And I know Karabo goes to levels of UNFCCC and speaks on behalf of young people. So I think we need to continue to do that as the Global South, as Africa, and unite and bring ideas together as we go forward, because it's no solution if we're working in silos, but we're challenging this bigger giant that is climate finance and that is climate change in its entirety. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Boitumelo, for that. Rana, I can see your hand is up. If we can keep it brief, kindly, in the interest of
Very, very brief, but I think the climate finance part, because I think there is a part that is a reality, the climate finance part. So from Rentown side, we looked into climate finance for renewable energy and for development. And the reality is most of it is actually going to mitigation and not for adaptation. And I think there is an opportunity we really need to build upon is like the importance of renewable energy to adapt to climate change and how important it is for basically global South countries. And push basically this angle into you see like the Bonn meetings into COP30 and really develop a new narrative about renewable energy for the resilience of our economies and societies. So I think another angle to push for.
Thank you so much, Rana, for that. I will be handing over to my colleague, Nomthandazo Mabena, for the concluding remarks.
Thank you so much, Samira, for that seamless moderation and for guiding such a rich and thought-provoking discussion. And of course, thank you to all our panelists for your powerful insights. As we wrap up this webinar launch, I just wanted to add on to it. As someone who witnessed firsthand the struggles that many communities face when it comes to energy access, the reality of energy poverty continues to shape the daily lives of millions across Africa. But campaigns like What's Up Africa remind us that we are not powerless. They remind us that energy justice is not just about infrastructure or policy, it's about dignity, opportunity, and the right to a future where no one is left in the dark or behind. By coming together, sharing knowledge, and pushing for change, we can build a movement that ensures equal energy solutions for all. Let this campaign be more than just a conversation. Let it be the catalyst for action, because every community, everyone, every home deserves the power to thrive. Work starts now, and it starts with us. We invite you to stay connected and be involved in the movement for a just and sustainable energy future for Africa by visiting our website, whatsupafrica.org. I will repeat, whatsupafrica.org, which provides all the information for where you can find us on social media, the sign-on campaign statement, our global citizen petition, and lots of materials to indulge in. Thank you, Samira and Karabo.
I guess that brings us to the end of this webinar. Again, thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.